New Year's Eve. For most people, it is the night of laughter, fireworks, and celebration. But for some, it is the night when something unspeakable comes crawling out of the darkness. Imagine driving down an empty back road in the dead of winter, your only companion a loyal dog until it vanishes into the forest, chasing something you cannot see. Picture yourself stranded in a raging blizzard, accepting a ride from a stranger whose silence feels heavier than the storm itself. Or think about standing on the frozen surface of a lake, only to realize the desperate plea for help was nothing but bait to lure you into a trap. These are not urban legends. These are true stories of terror, survival, and the razor-thin line between life and death. Welcome to The Price Paid, where we bring you chilling tales of real-life horror. If you are brave enough to continue, hit that subscribe button now, because what you are about to hear will haunt you long after the clock strikes midnight. Do you still think New Year's Eve is just a night for celebration, or could it be the night you never come home? It was New Year's Eve of 2017, the kind of night when most people were preparing champagne and fireworks. But I was preparing for a lonely drive through the cold roads of Ohio. I had just returned from Rochester after finishing the semester at the university. My parents had already gone ahead to the party at my cousin's house because my flight was delayed, leaving me with a spare car and our golden retriever for company. I was not in the best mood that evening. The Browns had lost again, sealing their miserable season without a single win. My frustration lingered even as I loaded my bags into the car. The thought of spending the holiday on my own felt like a punishment, but at least I had the dog Vera with me. She had always been a comfort, her calm energy making long drives easier. The night air was freezing and sharp when I stepped outside. The snow barely coated the ground, just a dusting that reflected the pale light of my headlights. The roads twisted through farmland and forests, endless dark shapes beyond the reach of the beams. Vera was restless, shifting in the passenger seat as though sensing the unease in me. About half an hour into the trip, she began to whine. At first I thought she wanted attention, but then she stood up and started pacing. I realized she needed to go out, so I pulled over at the next clearing, a narrow space between the trees. I cut the engine and let the silence settle in. There was no wind, no sound of cars, nothing but the faint crunch of snow as I stepped out. The stillness was overwhelming. Even though I had grown up in Ohio, I had never gotten used to how empty the woods felt at night. I let Vera out without a leash. She sniffed around happily, tail wagging, her breath clouding in the air. I shoved my hands into my pockets, shivering. I was impatient for her to finish, but then the night broke with a sound that made my blood freeze. It was not a twig snapping, not the creak of ice, but a heavy crashing, deliberate and violent, as if someone was running full speed through the trees. The noise was so loud that I jumped back instinctively. My heart slammed against my ribs. Before I could even call her, Vera bolted straight into the forest. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, swallowed by the blackness between the trunks. I shouted her name again and again, panic twisting my throat, but the only reply was the distant echo of her movement. I could not leave her. I could not just drive away. Without thinking, I ran into the woods after her. The darkness was absolute, the weak glow of my phone flashlight barely illuminating the snow. Branches clawed at my jacket as I stumbled blindly forward, calling her name, my breath burning in the icy air. The noise that had lured her deeper into the forest was gone, leaving only silence. That silence was worse than the crashing. It was suffocating, unnatural, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. I ran until my lungs screamed for air. At last I stopped, leaning against a tree, ready to collapse. My chest ached, and my thoughts blurred with fear. Then, out of the shadows, I saw her. Vera was creeping toward me, her body low to the ground, tail tucked between her legs. She trembled so violently that I could feel it when she pressed against me. I had never seen her so terrified. Relief flooded me, but it was poisoned by dread. Something had scared her to the core. Something was still out there, I whispered to her, urging her to follow, and together we tried to retrace our steps back to the car. But every direction looked the same. The trees were endless, their shapes like tall black walls against the faint glow of snow. As I tried to steady my breathing, another sound erupted behind us. This time the crashing was closer, heavy steps that seemed to follow in rhythm with ours. I did not think. I simply ran. Vera sprinted ahead, and I followed, stumbling and sliding, convinced with every heartbeat that something was about to drag me down.
We're going the
The
wrong
sound
way.
did not fade. It chased us. Always behind, always close enough that I could feel the vibration in the ground. Then, as if guided by some miracle, Vera led me straight to the clearing where the car was waiting. I nearly sobbed with relief. I flung the door open and shoved her inside before diving behind the wheel myself. My hand shook as I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. I dared one glance back toward the tree line. That glance nearly stopped my heart. 3 figures stood at the edge of the woods, perfectly still, watching us. I could not make out their faces, but I knew they were human. They did not move, did not call out, only stared as I slammed my foot on the gas and sped away. I drove for miles without looking back, my chest still heaving. It was only when Vera whimpered that I realized she was bleeding. My stomach dropped. I pulled over and rushed to her side, lifting her fur. There was a gash just beneath her shoulder blade, deep and raw, as though she had been stabbed or cut by something sharp. I scrambled to the trunk, finding the first aid kit my mother always insisted we carry. My hands worked frantically, cleaning and wrapping the wound while Vera whined softly. I kept whispering to her, promising she would be okay, though I was not sure if I believed it myself. When I finally got back on the road, the night seemed endless. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. I thought about turning around, about telling my parents what had happened, but in the end, I said nothing. The story stayed locked inside me, gnawing at me every New Year's Eve since. I cannot explain who those figures were, or why they were there, or what they wanted. All I know is that I came close to losing my dog, and maybe my life, in those woods. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see them standing there, waiting, as if they are not finished with me yet. The night had started quietly enough, with nothing more than a few flurries dusting my windshield as I drove through the back roads of Pennsylvania. It was New Year's Eve, and my plan had been simple: make it to my parents' house with enough time to spare before midnight. I liked long drives. They gave me time to think, to unwind. The snow at first seemed like a blessing, soft and pretty under the glow of the headlights. But as the miles passed, the flakes grew thicker, heavier, until the windshield became a swirling sheet of white. The storm had turned into a true blizzard by the time the road began to feel slick beneath the tires. My little sedan, already pouring snow, started slipping even on the smallest inclines. I had no choice but to pull over. Continuing felt like gambling with my life. I parked on the shoulder, far enough off the road to avoid the few passing cars. I could feel the isolation pressing in through the glass. There was nothing but the storm howling around me. I texted my parents to tell them I would be late, and their panic came through, even in their typed replies. I tried to reassure them, but my own heart was racing as I watched the snow pile higher. I turned the engine on and off to save gas, alternating between cold silence and the weak hum of the heater. The thought of spending the night out there alone crept over me like frost. I told myself the storm would let up, but deep down I felt it was only getting worse. The snow kept coming, burying the road, swallowing my car like a tomb. Then, through the swirling white, a light appeared. Headlights cutting through the storm, closer and closer. Relief surged in me so hard I nearly cried. A snowplow pulled up beside me, its engine rumbling like some mechanical beast. The driver leaned out of his cab, an older man with a lined face, his features weathered and creased by decades of hard winters. A black knit cap was pulled down low over his ears, and his jacket looked as thick as armor. He stared at me longer than seemed normal, the silence stretching as the snow whipped between us. At last he asked if I was okay, his voice low and gravelly, like he had been smoking for years. It was not unfriendly, but it made me uneasy. I told him my car could not handle the storm, and asked if he knew of any nearby places to wait it out. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the back seat of my car, lingering there for reasons I could not name. After a long pause, he offered me a ride. I hesitated. Everything about the situation felt strange, but the idea of staying alone in my car all night felt worse. I asked if he could take me to my parents' place, and he said yes, no problem. I asked what to do about my car, and he shrugged, saying leave it. The storm was too dangerous to worry about it now. I climbed into the cab of the plow, clutching my bag, and at first, the warmth inside was like stepping into a different world. My fingers thawed, my shoulders loosened. The man did not speak much after that. He asked where I was headed, I told him.
Stay where you are.
And he nodded again without comment. The cab smelled faintly of oil and something sour, maybe liquor. The silence stretched on, broken only by the engine's growl and the hiss of snow against the windshield. I started to notice small things. The way his hands gripped the wheel too tightly. The way he kept glancing at me from the corner of his eye. The way his lips pressed into a thin line whenever the road curved. It was then I realized we were not heading in the right direction. My GPS, sitting on my lap, pointed the opposite way from where we were going. I asked as calmly as I could if we were taking the correct route. His demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly, like a shadow passing over his face. Without looking at me, he said we were taking a detour, that the back roads were safer than the highway. His tone was flat, unconvincing. I knew the area only vaguely, but my gut twisted at his words. I glanced down at my GPS again. He was missing turns, letting it recalibrate over and over without following its instructions. I felt my pulse quicken. I started to study the cab more closely. Empty liquor bottles rolled near his boots, clinking softly with every bump. Torn-up maps were crammed into the door pocket, some marked with scribbles I could not make out. Then my eyes caught on something between the seats, the hilt of a knife. My mouth went dry. I sat still, my heart hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. Every instinct screamed at me to get out. We were miles from anywhere, the storm making the world outside a white blur, but staying in that cab felt like waiting for a trap to close. Through the windshield, a shape appeared in the distance, a house, faint but real, the first sign of life I had seen since leaving my car. It was close enough that I thought I could run to it if I had to. I made my decision in that moment. I waited until we were nearly alongside it, then took a deep breath, yanked the door handle, and kicked the door open. Cold air slammed into me like a wave. The ground rose up and knocked the breath from my lungs as I hit it hard, pain flashing through my leg. I scrambled up, ignoring it, and ran for the house as fast as the snow would let me. Behind me, I heard him shouting something, fumbling for something in the glove box. I did not look back. My only focus was reaching that door. I pounded on it with my fists, screaming for help. A man and woman opened it, their eyes wide, and they pulled me inside without hesitation. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping out what had just happened. They did not waste time with questions. The woman called the police immediately.
Oh my gosh.
When the officers finally arrived, the snowplow was gone, vanished into the storm as though it had never existed. They took a report, promised to search the area, but I could tell from their faces that finding him in that blizzard was unlikely. The couple gave me a blanket, a cup of something hot. I could barely stop shaking. Later, my father was furious when he heard what had happened, but beneath that anger, I saw the fear in his eyes. I still think about that night whenever snow begins to fall, the way the man stared at me, the knife glinting between the seats, the silence in that cab heavier than the storm outside. I do not know who he was, or what he had planned for me, but I know how close I came to never making it home. Every New Year's Eve since, I remember that drive and the decision to jump, and I wonder how many others might have sat in that cab, too afraid or too trusting to escape. New Year's Eve had never meant fireworks or crowded parties for me. Growing up in rural northwestern Ontario, my family had its own strange tradition. While most people celebrated with champagne and noise, my father and his friends would pack their gear and head out onto the frozen lakes to go ice fishing. I had spent countless New Year's Eve standing in the middle of the cold, watching my father drill holes into the thick ice while snow drifted over us. Even after he passed away and my brother moved to Chicago, I felt an odd duty to keep that tradition alive. It felt like a tether to the past, something that reminded me of who I was and where I came from. That year, I convinced my two closest friends, Nate and Trevor, to come along. They were the kind of rugged men who looked at home in the wilderness, men who wore plaid jackets like armor and seemed more at ease with axes and fishing rods than with city life. With them beside me, I thought nothing could go wrong. The drive was long but familiar. Nate's truck was built for terrain like this. Heavy tires, four-wheel drive, a bed full of gear from bait to rods to a collapsible shelter to shield us from the cold if it got too brutal. The forecast had promised a clear night, though anyone from Ontario knew not to trust predictions when winter was involved. Still, we were confident. We wanted the isolation, the silence, the break from the chaos of the world. The lake we were heading to was a hidden gem, not known by tourists or weekend fishers. Tucked away among dense trees, it froze solid and remained that way deep into the winter. If you did not know the path, you would never find it. That was the appeal. Secrecy felt like safety, though I would learn the opposite was true. As Nate maneuvered the truck down snowy back roads, we laughed and made small talk, eager for the night ahead. But when we arrived near the trailhead, my mood shifted. A figure stood by the roadside, bundled in heavy winter gear. At first I thought nothing of it. Maybe another fisherman with the same idea. But something about the way he just stood there, motionless, staring at our truck, unsettled me. His gaze did not wander. It pinned us, cold and deliberate. I muttered to my friends that the guy was creeping me out. Trevor shrugged it off, Nate nodded but stayed quiet. We were about to start unloading gear when the man suddenly rushed toward us, waving his arms frantically. He shouted that his buddy had fallen through the ice and that he needed help immediately. He even flashed his phone as if showing proof of a message. His desperation seemed real. Without much thought, Trevor opened his door, and the three of us were suddenly following him down the trail, leaving our gear behind. The cold hit like knives as we jogged after him, breath turning into clouds in the air. Something about the situation gnawed at me, though. His speed. The way he barely looked back. The strange path he chose.
What do we do now?
We were not heading toward the usual fishing spots where the ice was thick. Instead, he led us toward a more remote section, a place I had always avoided because the ice near the shore was unpredictable. I opened my mouth to suggest we stop, but before I could, we reached the lake. My stomach dropped when I saw two more men waiting. They were not dressed like fishermen. They did not have rods or gear. They just stood at the edge of the ice, motionless, like they had been expecting us. One of them shouted for us to stop, and in the faint light I saw the outline of a gun. The world seemed to tilt in that moment. I realized we had walked straight into a trap. The man who had led us there slowed and turned, a smirk spreading across his face. Everything clicked: the phone, the urgency, the perfect lure. Rage and fear flooded me at once. Nate froze as one of the men demanded his truck keys, waving the weapon casually but firmly. We did not resist. Nate tossed the keys, and the three of us emptied our pockets. I tried to hide my phone in my sleeve, but one of them barked that they wanted everything, and I reluctantly surrendered it. Nate claimed his phone was in the truck. They laughed at that. For a moment, I wondered if they would pull the trigger just to prove their control. The men herded us back up the trail at gunpoint. The snow crunched under our boots, each step heavy with dread. At the road, one of them climbed into Nate's truck while the others melted back into the woods. The sound of the engine roaring to life cut through the still night. We stood there, powerless, as the vehicle sped off, leaving us stranded in the freezing dark. My blood boiled. I wanted to chase them, to fight, but what chance did we have against men with guns? Trevor swore under his breath. Nate kicked at a tree, over and over, cursing loudly, his voice cracking with frustration. The cold bit into us as we stood there in disbelief. Then Nate pulled out his phone. Relief washed over me. He had lied. He had kept it hidden. A risky gamble that paid off. He dialed the police, his voice trembling with both fury and relief as he explained what had happened. The dispatcher told us to stay put, so we huddled together, our breath mingling in the frigid air, waiting. The silence was broken only by Nate's angry muttering, Trevor's sighs, and my own thoughts circling endlessly. How had we been so stupid? Why had we trusted a stranger's story without a second thought? We had walked straight into their hands. The police eventually arrived, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. They took our statements, asked questions, and promised to search. They drove us back to Trevor's place, leaving the trailhead behind. Nate's truck, they said, might never be found. The men had likely switched vehicles, vanished into the endless back roads. We were lucky to be alive, the officer said, his tone grave. I knew he was right, but that did little to ease the fury boiling in me. We had not just lost material things. We had lost our sense of safety, our trust in the wilderness we had loved. That night had been meant to honor tradition, but instead it became something else entirely. Even now, I cannot shake the image of that man standing by the road, staring at us, waiting like a spider at the edge of its web. I wonder how many others he and his partners lured that way. I wonder if they had planned it all along, or if we were just unlucky prey that wandered into their trap. Some nights I imagine what would have happened if we had fought back, if we had refused to follow him, if we had brought weapons of our own. But imagination is a cruel thing. The truth is we survived, and Nate's car was never recovered. The men were never caught. And every year when the calendar turns and the world celebrates, I think of that night on the ice, the smirk on the stranger's face, and the realization that traditions can turn deadly in the blink of an eye. Every New Year's Eve, people look forward to lights, noise, and the promise of a clean slate. It is supposed to be a night of celebration, a night when the weight of the old year is cast aside and hope takes its place. Yet, there is something darker hidden within that night, a vulnerability that few think about until it is too late. When families gather in warm homes and cities are filled with laughter, those who are caught outside find themselves alone, isolated, and exposed. That was the common thread running through three separate stories from different corners of North America, three encounters that turned what should have been a night of joy into nights of terror. The first was a student returning home, exhausted from travel, bitter from a miserable football season, and accompanied only by his loyal golden retriever. What should have been a simple drive became a descent into fear when his dog bolted into the forest after hearing something crashing in the dark. The woods that night were silent and oppressive. Each tree, a shadow hiding threats he could not see. He found his dog again, trembling, injured by something unseen, and when he turned to flee, 3 figures were waiting at the tree line, watching him. He escaped with his life, but the cut on his dog's side proved that whatever lurked in those woods was not only real, but violent. He never told his family, choosing to bury the memory instead. But every year since, the image of those silent watchers has haunted him. The second was a traveler stranded in a Pennsylvania blizzard. Snow fell so heavily that his car was swallowed. The world beyond his windshield reduced to a swirling white void. Just when hope seemed lost, a snowplow appeared, driven by an older man with a lined face and a voice like gravel. At first, relief filled him. Then unease crept in as the man drove the wrong way, ignoring the GPS, bottles and torn maps cluttering the cab, and a knife glinting between the seats. The silence of that ride was heavier than the storm outside, and in the end, it was instinct that saved him. He flung the door open and ran to the nearest house, begging for help, while the plow disappeared into the storm behind him. The police never found the driver. To this day, he wonders what would have happened had he not jumped when he did. He suspects he would never have seen another dawn. The third was a group of friends in Ontario, carrying on a family tradition of ice fishing. They were hardy men, prepared for the cold, confident in their ability to handle the wilderness. But confidence is fragile when strangers have guns. The man who appeared by the roadside played his role perfectly, frantic, desperate, waving his phone, claiming his friend had fallen through the ice. Their compassion betrayed them. They followed, believing they were about to save a life, only to discover 2 more men waiting with weapons. The trap closed before they realized what was happening. Their truck was stolen, their belongings gone, and the robbers vanished into the woods. The police said they were lucky, and maybe they were. But the anger of being tricked, the rage of seeing their trust used against them, burned hotter than the cold. To this day, they still do not know if the robbery was a calculated scheme, or if they were just unlucky enough to stumble into predators waiting for prey. Each story happened hundreds of miles apart, to different people who did not know each other, yet they share the same core. Each one occurred on New Year's Eve, a night when guards are lowered, when people want to believe the worst has passed and the new will be better. The isolation of a road through Ohio fields, the blindness of a Pennsylvania blizzard, the remoteness of a frozen Ontario lake each backdrop was chosen by fate to remind them of how fragile safety really is. Each person survived, but they carried scars, a wounded dog, a body that still shakes at the thought of snow, a tradition turned into a memory of betrayal. There is something deeply unsettling about the timing of these encounters. On a night built around celebration, the darkness of humanity and the unknown made their presence felt. It is as if the world waits for those moments when people are most unguarded, when the contrast between joy and despair is at its sharpest. And in that gap, danger thrives. These survivors all describe the same emotions, the sudden shift from normalcy to horror, the adrenaline that kept them alive, the lingering fear that nothing will ever feel safe again. What is most haunting is that these were not ghost stories or legends whispered around campfires. These were real people, recounting real moments when the line between life and death narrowed to a single choice, whether to run into the forest to save a dog, whether to jump from a moving plow, whether to surrender or fight on a frozen lake. That line is always thinner than we want to believe. For some, it is the difference between arriving at a party and disappearing forever. For others, it is the difference between a tradition kept and a life stolen. The common thread is not just the date, but the reminder that evil and misfortune do not rest for holidays. They strike when least expected, when the calendar suggests safety, when the world celebrates the idea of new beginnings. The survivors of these stories are marked not by scars alone, but by the awareness that safety is an illusion. Every year, as the clock ticks down to midnight, they are not thinking of champagne or fireworks. They're thinking of shadows in the trees, knives hidden in trucks, and guns waiting on ice. New Year's Eve can be a time of joy, but for those who live these stories, it is forever a reminder that danger hides behind the thin veil of celebration. It asks a terrible question. When the year ends and the world counts down together, will you make it to the new year, or will you pay the price for letting your guard down, even for one night? When the clock strikes midnight on New Year's Eve, most people think of celebration, of champagne, of laughter echoing through warm homes. But for those who live through the horrors of these 3 stories, that night will forever mean something different. To them, the stroke of midnight recalls cold roads, hidden dangers, and the sharp realization that joy can dissolve into terror in an instant. The man in Ohio learned that the woods are not always empty. He saw figures standing in silence, watching him with intentions he never discovered, and he carried his injured dog back into the safety of the car, knowing that something had tried to take her from him. The traveler in Pennsylvania realized that not every stranger offering help is a savior. In the blizzard's blinding fury, he recognized the weight of instinct, and that by trusting his gut and leaping into the cold, he likely saved his life. The friends in Ontario discovered that compassion can be manipulated, that a desperate cry for help can sometimes be nothing but a lure into violence. They lost possessions and trust, and though they survived, they understood that even traditions can be shattered by cruelty. Each of these stories forces us to look at our own lives and ask hard questions. What would we have done? Would we have chased the dog into the woods? Would we have stayed in that cab, too afraid to jump? Would we have followed a stranger's frantic plea without stopping to think? The truth is that in moments of danger, reason often gives way to instinct, and survival comes down to one decision, one choice made in the heart of fear. The lesson is not to live in paranoia, but to live with awareness. The world is filled with beauty, but it is also filled with shadows. Holidays do not pause those shadows. Celebrations do not erase the existence of those who wait for opportunity. Staying alert, trusting your instincts, and being prepared may not guarantee safety, but they can make the difference when seconds count. These survivors remind us that danger does not arrive with warning sirens. It arrives quietly, in the middle of a tradition, in the lull of a storm, in the space between fireworks. If you take anything from their experiences, let it be this. Never assume the night is harmless simply because it is meant for joy. Darkness does not respect holidays. And sometimes the most ordinary nights become the most terrifying memories. This is the reality behind the phrase we live by here, the price paid. Every story carries a cost, a scar, a reminder that safety is fragile and survival is never promised. If you want to hear more stories like these, real stories that reveal the chilling truths behind our most vulnerable moments, subscribe now to The Price Paid. Because while the world celebrates, we uncover the shadow sand, those shadows may be closer than you think.